Welcome back to Park Ranger Files. Today's video is 5 true stories from 5 completely different people. Different lives, different jobs, different parts of the mountains. And every single one of them ends the same way, with someone walking out of an old house and never going back. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment below telling me where you're from, and let's get into it. Story 1. My name is Derek. I'm 41 years old, and I've been a licensed electrician for going on 18 years. I've been inside more walls and crawl spaces than I can count. I pull wire for a living. I've worked on houses that were actively on fire, houses where the knob and tube wiring was so old and brittle, it crumbled between my fingers like stale crackers. I'm not easily rattled. I say that not to be impressive, but because I need you to understand my baseline. I am the person on any job site who everyone else calls when something looks wrong, because I don't panic. I assess, I figure it out. I should mention that the property sat at the end of a gravel road off Route 7, about 11 miles from the nearest town of any real size. That isolation matters, not because isolation caused what happened. I don't believe that, but because it's part of the texture of the job. And it set the conditions for my being alone there when I shouldn't have been. The property management company had done a light inspection before contracting the work. Just enough to know the structure was sound enough to enter, not enough to know much else. They'd handed me a set of keys, a rough floor plan sketched on a legal pad, and a date by which they wanted electrical done. That was the entire briefing. In my experience, that level of information is exactly what you get on a job nobody's looked at too hard yet. The house had been empty for at least 15 years, going by the buildup of organic material on the porch. Leaves and pine needles composted into a layer of soft, dark soil in the corners, thick enough to grow moss in. The window frames on the east side had birds' nests in the upper corners, old ones, several seasons layered on top of each other. Cobwebs dense enough to have structural integrity across the front windows. 15 years empty is a specific kind of empty. Not recent, not ancient. Long enough that whatever the last inhabitants left behind has finished grieving the absence of people and settled into a different relationship with the space. I want to be precise about what I mean by that, because I know it sounds like I'm drifting into something poetic, and I'm not. I'm being descriptive. Houses that have been empty a long time feel different from houses that have been empty a short time. The recent empty ones still smell like the last family. Coffee, laundry detergent, whatever they cooked. They have the quality of interrupted life. The long empty ones have let all of that go. They've arrived at their own equilibrium. The air is the house's air, not borrowed from the people who lived in it. I've been in enough of both kinds to tell the difference in the first 2 minutes. This house that morning was the long, empty kind. It had its own atmosphere. So when I tell you that the footsteps upstairs sounded like a person who knew where they were going, I want you to understand that in contrast to what the house itself sounded like. Old houses in the morning hours, when the temperature is rising and the materials are expanding, they produce a whole vocabulary of sounds. Ticking, settling, the soft complaint of joists adjusting to load, the resonant thump of a loose piece of trim finally giving way. I know those sounds. I've been surrounded by them for 22 years. What I heard above me was not a building sound, it was a behavioral sound. It had intent in it. So when I tell you what happened up in Warfield County, I need you to sit with the fact that this isn't a story from someone who spooks easy. It was October 2 years back. The job was a resale. An old farmhouse that a property management company out of Charleston had acquired cheap and wanted to flip. The plan was new service entrance, panel upgrade, ground everything properly, replace the outlets and switches throughout. Standard gut job. The house was up a gravel road off Route 7, back behind a ridge so steep the cell service cut out about a mile before you even saw the property. The listing described it as mid-1940s construction with original character. which is real estate language for this thing is held together by paint and prayer and don't look too close at anything. I drove out there alone the first day. My apprentice, a kid named Cody, was supposed to meet me, but he texted me at 6 in the morning saying his truck wouldn't start. I figured I'd do the walkthrough by myself, make my materials list, and we'd start the real work the next day. I pulled up the gravel drive just after 7. The house sat back in a clearing, 2 stories, white siding gone the color of old teeth, big maple in the front yard that had dropped half its leaves, a stone chimney that had started to pull away from the side of the house in a way that made me wince professionally. There was no lock on the front door. Management company had said there wouldn't be. They'd had trouble with the key mechanism and told me just to go in. Door swung open easy. That loose, slightly falling forward swing of a door that hasn't had weight behind it in years. Inside was exactly what I expected. Wide plank floors, worn smooth, low ceilings with hand-cut beams. A kitchen that hadn't been touched since probably the Eisenhower administration. Old enamel sink, cast iron hardware, painted over so many times the screws had lost their slot definition. The smell was the usual mix. Dust, old wood, a faint sweetness that I've learned over the years is usually mouse activity somewhere in the walls. I started in the basement. Always start in the basement on these old houses. It tells you everything you need to know about how the original wiring was run, whether anyone's done amateur work over the years, what you're dealing with before you start tracing circuits. The basement door was in the kitchen. Old wooden steps, each one bowed and pale as driftwood. I pulled out my mag light and went down. The basement was unfinished dirt floor, fieldstone foundation, and it smelled like every Appalachian basement smells. Wet mineral and old wood and something almost biological, like the earth itself was breathing up through the floor. The panel was on the far wall. I crossed to it, got my notepad out, opened the door. Standard for the era. Fuses, not breakers. Some of the circuits had been labeled in pencil and then relabeled in marker and then relabeled in pencil again, which told me this house had been lived in by several different generations of people who all thought they understood electricity and none of them actually did. I was scribbling notes just in work mode when I heard it. Footsteps. Upstairs. In the kitchen directly above me. Heavy, deliberate. Not quick. Not skittish. The kind of footsteps that belong to a person who knows where they're going. My first thought was Cody. Maybe he got his truck running. Maybe he drove out without texting me. I called up the stairs. "Hey man, you make it?" Nothing. I listened. The footsteps had stopped when I called out, which is a normal thing. A person hears their name, they stop walking. I finished my notes on the panel, spent another 10 minutes in the basement doing a rough layout sketch, then came back upstairs. Kitchen was empty. I walked the whole ground floor. Nobody. I went to the front door, opened it, looked out at the drive. My truck was there. No other vehicle. I stood in the doorway for a minute listening to the yard. Wind in the maple, a crow somewhere in the ridge above, the creak of the loose chimney cap. Nothing human. I told myself the floors were settling. Old houses do that. The joists flex with the morning temperature change, and it can genuinely sound like footsteps if you're below them. I've heard it before. I wrote it off and went back to work. The second day, Cody came with me. We got a real start on stripping the old wiring. Work like that is loud, physical, you're focused. We were making good progress, and the house felt like any other house. It's just a dumb structure you're getting paid to improve. Around 2 in the afternoon, I sent Cody up to the second floor to trace the bedroom circuits while I worked on the kitchen run. I had the radio going, one of those little battery job site speakers. Classic rock station out of Huntington, coming in a little staticky but audible. After maybe 20 minutes, Cody came back down the stairs. I heard him on the steps. There's only one staircase, and it ran along the interior wall of the living room, and you could hear every single step from the kitchen. He came into the kitchen, and I glanced up at him, and I knew immediately something was wrong. He's a 22-year-old kid who thinks everything is hilarious. He's never serious. He was dead serious. He said, real flat and quiet, "There's somebody on the second floor." I turned the radio off. I asked him what he meant. He said he'd been up in the back bedroom, the one at the end of the hall, when he heard somebody breathing in the closet, not moving, not opening the door, just breathing. He stood there and listened to it for a full minute before he came and got me. He said he almost convinced himself it was the house, like pipes or something, but then it changed rhythm, like it reacted to him moving around. I grabbed the big mag light. We went up together. The upstairs hall was narrow, 4 doors off it, 2 bedrooms at the back, one at the front facing the yard, and a bathroom. The back bedroom's closet had an old wooden bifold door, the kind that's always slightly off its track. I stood in front of it for a second. Cody stood behind me. I could see on his face that he was embarrassed to be scared and also too scared to hide it. I knocked on the door once, the way you'd knock if you weren't sure someone was in there and you wanted to give them the chance to say something. Nothing. I pulled it open. Empty. Wooden rod, 3 wire hangers, and old wallpaper at the back of the closet that was peeling in long vertical strips. But the smell hit us both at the same time. It was wrong. Like copper and something damp and animal, like the inside of a well. Not the smell of the rest of the house. This smell was specific, located. It was coming from inside the closet, from somewhere behind the back wall. I leaned in with the light. The back wall of the closet had a seam in it that I'd initially read as a wallpaper seam. It wasn't. It was the edge of a door, painted over, hinged on the inside. I put my palm flat against it. It gave slightly with a soft exhale of that same smell. A pressurized space. Whatever was behind it had been sealed for a long time. I looked at Cody. He shook his head. "I should tell you. Professionally, I had a reason to open it. I needed to map the wall cavities. That's legitimate. I need to know if there are spaces I'm not accounting for." That's what I told myself. I pushed it open. It was a room. A small room. Maybe 8 by 8. That had been built into the space between the back bedroom and the exterior wall. No windows. The ceiling was low, maybe 6 feet. And it was not empty. There were chairs in it. 4 of them, wooden kitchen chairs arranged in a circle, facing inward. Each one had something on it. A folded piece of dark cloth, each folded identically, with something underneath, a small shape like an object wrapped up. The floor around the chairs was covered in writing, not scratched, not graffiti, written in pencil, in a careful small cursive that had gone over the same words dozens of times until they were almost black with layering. I got close enough to read a line before I stopped myself. It said, "We wait for the ones who open." Cody was already in the hall. I backed out of the closet, pulled the bifold shut, and walked out without touching anything. We packed up our tools. We were off that property in under 8 minutes. I drove straight to the management company's office in Charleston that afternoon and told them they needed to disclose what they knew about that room before I sent anyone else into that house. The woman I spoke to looked at me for a long time and then asked how I'd found it. I said that the question told me everything I needed to know. I quit the job. I never heard from them again. I drove past that road once, about 6 months later, and the gravel drive had been blocked off with a new chain-link gate. The house was still there, back behind the maple. I didn't slow down. That writing on the floor, "We wait for the ones who open." I've thought about it a lot. I don't know if it was something old. I don't know if it was something recent. I know what it smelled like in that room. I know Cody heard breathing in a closet that nobody was inside. I know the chairs were arranged like something was expected, and I know I'm the person who opened the door. I record most of these stories late at night, and good sleep matters. If you're struggling too, I've linked the mattress I personally use below. Story 2. I'm going to tell you this straight because I spent a lot of years as a journalist, and I have a hard time with dramatic buildup. I like facts arranged in order. I like to say what happened, what I saw, and let you draw conclusions. This is going to be hard to tell that way, but I'm going to try. My name is Lenora. I'm 48. I spent 15 years as a features writer for a regional paper out of Roanoke before the paper folded, the way papers do now, quietly and all at once. After that, I did some freelance work, mostly travel and nature pieces for regional magazines, the kind of work that gets you into interesting places on someone else's dime, but doesn't pay the mortgage. I was doing a piece in the fall. This would be 3 years ago now, on the decline of coal-era housing stock in Southern Virginia. The story was about preservation efforts, what was being saved, what was being lost, the communities that had existed in those company-owned towns, and whether any physical record of them would survive. Part of that story took me to a hollow called Crick Run, about 25 miles outside of Grundy. The road in was paved, but barely, patched so many times it looked quilted, the yellow center line long since faded to ghost. I was looking for the remains of a row of company houses that a preservation advocate named Bill had told me about. He said there had been 8 of them, and 3 were still partially standing. He'd been out there the previous spring for photographs. Bill didn't come with me. I went alone because that's how I work. I like the first look at a place to be mine without someone narrating over it. I parked at the end of a 2-track and walked in maybe a quarter mile through second-growth forest, the kind that comes back after logging, thin and crowded, the trees too close together, all the same diameter, like they grew up at the same time and never sorted themselves out. The houses were there, just like Bill said, 3 of them still standing, more or less, in a line with maybe 40 feet between each one, fronting what must have been a road at some point, and was now just a slightly flatter strip of grass and moss. The other foundation pads were visible in the undergrowth. Rectangular depressions, each one full of vegetation that grew slightly differently than the forest around it, as if the ground remembered what had stood there. I spent a couple of hours doing interviews with myself, basically, walking through each structure, taking notes, photographing the details. The company houses were utilitarian, built fast and cheap, but there were touches that the families had added over the decades. Flower boxes now rotted to the frame, a painted design on a porch post. Someone had put up a small trellis beside one door that had long since pulled free and collapsed, but you could see where it had been attached. The third house was the most intact. All 4 walls standing, roof collapsed at the back but solid at the front. Floors intact on the ground floor, though badly weakened. I'd been inside the other 2 without incident. I went into this one the same way. Tested the threshold, moved slow, kept my weight toward the walls where the joists were stronger. The interior was dim. Light came through 2 windows whose glass was gone, and through the holes in the roof at the back. I moved through the main room, the kitchen. The usual story? Fixtures gone. Walls stripped of anything worth taking, a few things too heavy or too damaged to bother. A cast iron stove, an enamel bathtub that had been carried into the kitchen at some point for reasons I couldn't figure. A broken wardrobe with one door hanging open. I went to the wardrobe out of habit. An open door always pulls my attention. Professional instinct, or maybe just the way my brain's wired. Inside were clothes, not many, maybe 6 or 7 garments hanging from a wooden rod. They were in remarkable condition relative to everything else in the house. Faded but not rotted, coated in dust but structurally intact. A woman's dress in dark blue cotton. 2 men's work shirts, flannel, one with a button missing. A child's coat, heavy wool, deep brown, with a pattern of small white diamonds down the sleeve. I reached out and touched the coat's sleeve. The fabric held. I was thinking about the story. A family that had left quickly enough to leave their clothes, or a family that had planned to come back. I was composing sentences in my head. Then I noticed the photographs. They were tucked inside the chest pocket of one of the work shirts. 4 of them, folded together, which was why I hadn't seen them at first glance. Small prints, the size they used to make at drugstores, the glossy kind with the white border. I unfolded them carefully. The first 3 were ordinary. Family photos. A man and a woman on a porch, squinting in summer light. Children around a table. A group of people in Sunday dress standing in front of what looked like a church. The kind of photographs that turn up in estate sales and antique shops, severed from any context. The 4th photograph was different. It was the front of this house. The exact house I was standing in. I recognized the window frames, the particular lay of the porch steps, the shape of the tree in the yard. Smaller than, maybe 30 years younger, but the same tree still there outside the window. The photograph had been taken in winter, snow on the ground, no leaves, and standing in the doorway of the house, the same doorway I had walked through an hour ago, was a figure. The figure was in shadow. You couldn't make out a face, not clearly. It was standing very still, or the exposure was long, and it had been moving and blurred. But it was tall and the posture was wrong. The head was tilted sharply to the right, like a dog hearing a sound. The arms were at the sides, fingers. I could see fingers, pointing slightly downward and forward, away from the body, in a way that seemed involuntary rather than posed. There was a date on the back of the photograph, handwritten in ink. The month and year. I did the math. The photograph was 43 years old. I put the photographs back in the pocket exactly as I found them, folded in order. I stepped back from the wardrobe. I'm going to be very clear here. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in hauntings in any supernatural sense. I believe in psychology and physics and the way the human pattern recognition system can generate terror out of shadow and coincidence. I believe all of that. And I left the house immediately. Not because I was frightened. I'm telling myself even now that it wasn't fear. I left because the air in the room had changed while I was looking at that photograph. It had gotten colder in a way that felt directional, like cold, coming from behind me. And when I turned around, the doorway to the back of the house, the part where the roof had collapsed, had a shadow in it that didn't match the light. It was the shape of a person standing in a doorway, very still, head slightly tilted. I got out and I didn't run. I walked at a pace that I would describe as extremely purposeful. I went straight to my car. I drove until I had cell signal, and I called Bill and asked him whether he'd experienced anything unusual in that 3rd house. There was a pause, then he said, "Lenora, I didn't go inside the 3rd one." I asked him why not. He said he'd driven out there in the spring, same as he'd told me. He'd photographed the first 2 houses, interior and exterior. When he got to the 3rd one and stood in front of it, he'd raised his camera and looked through the viewfinder at the open door. He said there was already someone standing in it. He described the same posture I'd seen in the wardrobe photograph, the same tilt of the head. He said he got back in his car and left, and he hadn't been back, and he probably should have mentioned it before I drove out there alone. I never wrote that piece. I couldn't figure out how to include what had happened without it swallowing the story I'd been sent to write. I filed a different version without the 3rd house, without the photographs, without the figure in the doorway. The editor loved it. It ran on a Sunday. I got a few letters about it, the kind of warm, appreciative mail that feature writers dream about. A woman wrote to me from Grundy who said she'd grown up in one of those company houses, and she thanked me for treating the story with dignity. I kept that letter. What I didn't keep, what I couldn't keep even when I tried, was the image of the figure in that wardrobe photograph, the tilt of the head. I've described it here as a sharp tilt, like curiosity, but that's not quite right. I've been struggling with the language for 3 years. It wasn't the tilt of something curious. It was the tilt of something listening. There's a difference in what that posture communicates. Curiosity faces outward, toward the thing being looked at. What I saw in that photograph faced inward, like it was attending to a sound only it could hear, like it was receiving information I wasn't privy to, like the camera had interrupted something. I've been a journalist for a long time. I've interviewed people in crisis and grief in the middle of catastrophic events. I know what it looks like when a person is present in a moment versus when a person is somewhere else in their head. What I saw in that doorway at the end of the hall, the shadow that had the posture of the figure in the photograph, it was present. Fully present. Aware. That's the thing I keep circling back to. Not the strangeness of it. The awareness. I kept my notes. I still have them in a folder in my filing cabinet under C for Crick Run, and I have not opened that folder since I put it there. Occasionally I think about sending the notes somewhere, a university, a historical society, someone who collects accounts of this kind. But I haven't. I think I'm afraid of what the notes will say when I read them again. I was a journalist in the middle of a story in that house, and old habits don't quit easily. I took detailed notes on everything I observed, including things I'm no longer certain I want to have described in my own handwriting. And sometimes when I'm driving through that part of the state, I take Route 460 instead of the county road, because the county road goes past the turn for Crick Run, and I don't want to see the landmark I've started using to know when I'm close. There's a particular bend in the road before the turnoff where the trees open up just enough on the left side that if you look at the right moment, you can see the ridge above the hollow. On overcast days, there's always mist sitting in it. I tell myself that's all it is. Story 3. I want to start by saying I've walked more empty land in the Appalachian states than most people will see in their entire lives. I'm a licensed land surveyor. Have been for 22 years. My name is Walt. I'm 53 years old and I live outside of Lewisburg, West Virginia, and I will tell you plainly that this region has a way of reminding you that you are a very small thing in a very old place. That's not mysticism. That's just the reality of standing at the corner of a survey plat that was originally drawn in 1847, measuring a line that hasn't been walked since your grandfather was in diapers. What I'm going to describe happened about 4 years ago. I was doing a boundary survey on a tract of land in Monroe County. I won't give the specific location because the property has since been sold twice, and I don't want to create problems for the current owners who may have no idea what's on their land. The tract was roughly 200 acres of mixed hardwood and old pasture, and the job was to reestablish the corners and describe the boundary line for a title dispute. This kind of work requires you to find the original monuments, iron pins, stone cairns, sometimes nothing but a witness tree marked with a blaze that's been absorbed by bark over the decades. The western boundary of this property followed a ridge line, and below that ridge on the western side, outside the survey parcel, was what appeared on older county maps as a small settlement. The maps dated it to the 1920s and 1930s. By the time of my survey, there was nothing marked there. No road, no address, no notation, which isn't unusual. Settlements in Monroe County came and went with the timbering and the small-scale farming and the various industrial attempts that never quite took hold. I found the first corner on the ridge without trouble. An old iron pin driven into a rock outcrop and still plumb, still readable. From there, I needed to run the western line southward, which took me down the slope on the inside of the parcel, toward where the old settlement would have been, just outside my boundary. I was running the line with my instrument and my rod, moving south, flagging my path as I went. I wasn't thinking about anything except the geometry. I came out of the timber into a small natural clearing partway down the slope, and that's when I saw the first one, a house, still standing, 2 stories, stone foundation, wood frame above. The roof had failed on the north side, but the south side was still holding. It sat maybe 150 feet outside my boundary line, which meant it wasn't technically my business. But surveyors are curious people by nature. and I had a few minutes, and I'm not made of stone. I walked over. The exterior was overgrown. Raspberry canes had come up through the porch floor. Virginia creeper was making serious progress up the east wall. The front window frames were empty, the glass long gone, and the shutters on one side had fallen inward rather than outward, which is the detail that caught my attention first. Shutters fall outward when the hinges rust and let go. They fall inward when something has pushed them. I noted it without reading too much into it and continued around the perimeter. On the north side of the house, I found the second structure, a smaller outbuilding, maybe 12 by 20 feet, that had been built against the house's north wall. Its door was intact, steel, which was unusual for a structure that old. The steel was painted dark red, flaking now, but the door itself was solid. There was a hasp on it, no lock, just the hasp looped through a ring driven into the door frame. Recent hardware, not original to the structure. The ring looked new, relatively speaking, maybe 10 or 15 years old. I want to be very precise about the next part because it's the part I've gone over most carefully since. I lifted the hasp and opened the door. The interior was dark, and I was using my Survey tablet's flashlight app, which gives reasonable but not great illumination. The floor was bare earth. There were shelves along the walls, wooden, rough-built. On the shelves were containers, gallon-sized glass jars, sealed with lids, and coffee cans also sealed. Every one of them sealed. I counted them in my head. Maybe 40 containers across both sides of the outbuilding. I crossed to the nearest shelf. The jar closest to me was clouded on the inside, condensation or age on the glass. I couldn't see clearly what was in it. I picked it up, heavy, not just liquid, solid material inside as well. I turned it and the contents shifted. Dark earth, some plant material, small bones that looked like they were from a bird, and a piece of folded paper submerged in what I now realized was liquid, something dark and slightly viscous that was not water. I put the jar down. I looked along the shelf. All the other jars had similar contents: earth, organic material, small objects. I moved to the back of the outbuilding, and that's when I found the chart on the back wall. It was on a piece of wood, not paper, carved into the surface, then painted over with something dark. It showed a grid, and each square of the grid had a symbol in it, and what appeared to be a name or partial name in very small lettering. The grid was large, maybe 60 squares. Some of the squares had lines crossed through them. I took photographs on my phone. I backed out of the outbuilding. I walked back to my survey line. Here's the thing I can't fully account for. I have no memory of the next 4 hours. I've tried to reconstruct it. I've done everything a methodical person does when confronted with a gap in continuity. I've looked at the physical evidence. I've worked backward from the timestamps. I've talked to my colleague Patrice, who I checked in with by radio later that afternoon, and whose account of our radio conversation I have no memory of either. I've thought about whether there's a medical explanation, whether something in that outbuilding, an airborne contaminant, a mold, a gas, could cause a dissociative episode. It's possible, I'm not ruling it out. But I've been in basements and crawl spaces with black mold. I've worked in enclosures with solvent fumes. And the characteristic of every chemically induced cognitive episode I've ever experienced or heard described is confusion, disorientation, degraded performance. You don't come out of a chemical exposure with 4 hours of clean, accurate, professional field notes. You come out of it struggling to sign your name. My field notes for that afternoon are impeccable. The traverses are closed. The monument descriptions are complete and correct. The bearing calls are precise to the second. Whatever state I was in during those 4 hours, it was a state of complete professional competence, which is somehow worse than the alternative. Patrice told me when I called her that evening that I'd sounded focused on the radio. Her word. that I'd given her my status report clearly and quickly, which she'd noted because I'm usually chatty on the radio. I'll stop to tell a story or complain about road conditions. That afternoon I'd been brief and professional and then signed off. She'd thought I was having a bad day and wanted to be left alone. She hadn't been concerned. She wasn't concerned until I called her at home that evening asking what we'd talked about. That was the silence on the other end of the line that I think about most. Not a confused silence. More like she was deciding something. She said, "Walt, that land in Monroe County. Are you sure you want to be the one on that survey?" I asked her what she meant. She said she'd pulled the parcel history before I'd gone out, the way she always does, because Patrice is thorough, and she doesn't like surprises. She said the parcel had come up twice in county records for reasons unrelated to title. Once in 1988 for a property use inquiry. A neighbor had complained to the county about activity at the parcel that he described as ongoing and unusual and not agricultural. The complaint had been investigated and closed without findings. And once in 2003, when a county road crew doing drainage work on the adjacent lane had reported finding on the property boundary a line of what they described as glass containers, buried with their tops visible. The county had sent an environmental officer out. His report, which Patrice had pulled, described the containers as approximately 30 in number, sealed, containing organic material, and noted they did not appear to constitute an environmental hazard and recommended no action. The officer had noted in his report that he had been uncomfortable under the property and had not entered any structures and had recommended that any future assessment be done with a second officer present. I have surveyed approximately 400 parcels since that day. I have found old structures on many of them. I have not opened a single door. I wasn't specifically required to open for the job. My colleagues have started calling me superstitious, which is the funniest thing anyone has ever said about me. The Monroe County parcel sold last year. I looked up the deed transfer just out of habit. The listing description mentioned historic outbuilding with original features. The outbuilding was listed as a selling point. I thought about calling the buyer. I didn't. I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what was in those jars. I don't know what that chart on the wall meant because I don't have the photographs anymore. I know what I saw. And I know 4 hours of my life are documented in field notes I wrote, but cannot remember writing. And I know the cut on my hand healed faster than it should have, with no scar, which is its own small wrongness. If you're reading property records for Monroe County, West Virginia, and you find a listing with a red-doored outbuilding against the north side of a stone foundation house, leave that door alone. That's my professional recommendation. For whatever it's worth. These stories are real. If this content is giving you chills, please subscribe and support the channel. It helps me keep sharing these accounts. And drop a comment below. Which story hit you hardest so far? Walt's memory gap? Lenora's photograph? Let me know. There are 2 more stories to go and they don't get lighter. Story 4. My name's Ruben. I'm 36. I've been driving long haul for 8 years, and before that, I did regional delivery for 7. You spend that much time on the road, you start to know it different than other people do. You learn where the good truck stops are, which scales are calibrated mean, and which ones are lenient, which stretches of mountain road ice up first, and which ones will shake your rig apart if you don't slow down on the curves. You learn the country like a body of knowledge rather than a landscape. You're always moving through it, never stopped in it. I had a layover, which is trucker language for you're burning hours and can't legally keep rolling, so you stop somewhere and kill time. I was working a Midwest to Mid-Atlantic route, came down through Kentucky, and the hours worked out such that I had to park it for 11 hours, somewhere in McDowell County, West Virginia. I'd stopped in that county before. There's a truck stop on Route 52 that's decent, food's not bad, showers are clean. But that particular night, the lot was full, and I'd used up my leash on how far I could go before legally stopping. I pulled off on a county road I'd noted had an abandoned commercial lot. Old equipment dealer, long closed, where I figured I could park the cab without being anybody's problem. I got out to stretch. It was late, close to midnight. The road was absolutely empty in both directions. No headlights, no ambient light from any structure. Just the stars, which out there without light pollution are an almost violent amount of sky. I stretched my back, ate some crackers, did the usual things you do when you have 11 hours to fill and nowhere to go. The night was mild for October. About 100 yards up the road from where I was parked, I could see a structure set back from the road and some trees. House, I figured. Maybe a farmhouse. No lights. I didn't think much about it. After a while, I got curious the way you get curious at midnight when you're stuck and you don't want to sleep yet because your body clock is still on driving time. I walked up the road. It was a house. 2 stories, brick on the lower half, wood framing above. Not the usual build for the area. Most houses in those hollows are wood framed throughout. The brick was unusual, looked deliberate, like someone had wanted the lower portion to be permanent in a specific way. The property was overgrown. The drive had disappeared under grass, and there were trees growing up through what had been the flower beds near the front porch. The front porch had a swing. That's what I noticed first. Most porch swings in abandoned properties I've seen are collapsed, or rotten, or have fallen from their chains. This one was intact. It was still hanging, and it was moving. Not much, just the slight pendulum movement of something that has recently been disturbed, the kind of slow drift that follows a slight push. I stood at the edge of the property and watched it for a while. No wind, the trees weren't moving. Nothing else on the porch was moving. I know I should have gone back to my truck. I know. I walked up to the porch. The swing was still moving, slowly, barely. Up close I could see it was old but maintained. The chains weren't rusted through, the wood wasn't rotted. The cushion was gone, but the frame was solid. I touched one of the chain supports. Cold metal, slightly damp from the night air. Nothing unusual. I sat down on the swing more out of reflex than intent. The way you'd sit on any available seat when you've been on your feet. It held my weight without complaint. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, looking out at the dark road, listening to the sound of my truck idling 100 yards away. It was actually peaceful. That's the word I keep coming back to. It felt in that moment like someone's front porch, not an abandoned one. Like the house behind me still had life in it, which I realize is not a reassuring thing in retrospect, but in the moment it was just comfortable. I notice that detail most when I replay it. Drivers are not comfortable people, as a rule. We're always clock watching, always aware of our hours and our miles and the next leg of the route. We don't just sit. We don't just absorb a moment without calculating how it fits into the schedule. But there, on that porch, on those old boards, with the chains of that swing creaking slightly as I sat, I forgot about my truck. I forgot about my hours and my route and the delivery scheduled for the next morning. I sat there like I had nowhere else to be. Like the porch had decided I was staying and I just accepted the decision. I've driven past 100 porches since then and felt nothing like that. Whatever was in that feeling was specific to that place that night. The air had its own quality too, not cold, not warm, still. Not the usual October chill of the West Virginia night, which by midnight can bite pretty hard at elevation. This air was neutral, suspended, like inside a room that's been closed for years and just open, like air that had been waiting. I noticed it, but I didn't process it as strange. That was the thing. Nothing felt strange in the moment. Everything felt appropriate. Everything felt like it was supposed to be that way. That's the detail that disturbs me most looking back. The complete absence of alarm. Then the door behind me opened. not violently, not with a gust of wind or a bang. It just opened. I heard the latch click. I heard the slight groan of the hinge, and I felt the change in air pressure at my back that you feel when a door opens near you. I was on my feet in about half a second, turned around, heart going. The door was open about 8 inches, dark inside. I stood on the porch for about 30 seconds. Calling into a dark house at midnight is one of those things where you know, as you're doing it, that you're past the point of sensible decisions. I didn't call in. I just stood there with the open door in front of me. Something passed through the opening in the dark. I don't know how else to put it. Not through the door. Through the gap where the door was open. It was fast and it was low. Maybe knee height, and it made no sound. My brain said animal. Cat, maybe, or a large rat. But it wasn't shaped right for that. It was elongated, wrong proportions, and it moved without the quick skitter and pause of any animal I've ever seen. It moved continuously, smooth, and then it was around the far end of the porch and gone into the grass without a sound. I went back to my truck. I locked the doors. I lay in the bunk and I did not sleep until it was light enough outside that I felt like the sky was on my side. In the morning, I drove past the house again. In daylight, it looked like what it was. An old abandoned brick and frame farmhouse. Windows long since gone, door ajar. Porch soft with age and weather. The swing was still there, still, not moving. I thought about what I'd seen in the dark doorway. In daylight, with coffee and me, and the sun coming up over the ridge, I almost talked myself into the animal explanation. Category. Opossum. Groundhog, even. They move strangely sometimes, especially at night, especially when startled. Except I hadn't startled it. I hadn't moved. The door had opened, and it had come out through the gap in an unhurried, purposeful way. Like it was leaving. Like it had finished whatever it was doing inside, and it was time to go. I've thought about what the swing was doing when I first saw it moving with no wind, like something had just stood up from it. And I think about the fact that it felt peaceful on that porch. That comfortable, lived-in feeling. And I think the most unsettling version of that night is the possibility that whatever was in that house had been on the porch with me for some portion of those 5 minutes. And when it decided to go back inside, it opened its own door, and I was just sitting there, not knowing. I still run that route sometimes. I do not park on that county road anymore. There are worse things than driving tired. I know that now. Story 5. I teach 7th grade English. I've been doing it for 16 years in the same school, same county, same classroom on the 2nd floor facing the parking lot. My name is Priscilla, and I am the least likely person to be telling a story like this. I coach the school's debate team. I sponsor the literary magazine. I own 4 cats. I drink tea and I go to bed at 10. And the most adventurous thing I do on a regular basis is take the scenic route to the grocery store. I'm telling you this because the story I'm about to tell you is not the kind of story that fits the kind of person I am. And that's exactly why I think it needs to be told. Because if this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. This was during the summer break, 6 years ago. I had a cousin, Darnell, who'd gotten into selling salvaged architectural materials. Old heart pine flooring, antique hardware, light fixtures from demolished buildings, that sort of thing. He had a small warehouse outside of Blacksburg, where he'd clean and catalog everything and sell it online and at antique fairs. He asked me that summer if I wanted to help him clear out a property he'd gotten a lead on, a farmhouse in Giles County, whose owner had died without heirs and which had been sitting empty for almost 12 years. A neighbor had told him the interior was largely intact. Original fixtures, original floors, possibly original furniture. I said yes because I had nothing else to do that week, and because Darnell always made me laugh, and because I genuinely enjoy that kind of thing. Old houses, old objects, the material texture of how people used to live. I'm an English teacher. I'm interested in stories, and old houses are stories that haven't finished being told yet. That's how I thought about it. We drove out on a Wednesday morning. The house was at the end of a long gravel lane, up a slight grade, backed against the hillside. 2 stories, white clapboard, green shutters. Or they had been green once. Now they were a bleached and flaking gray-green, the color of lichen. The porch was full width across the front, with turned posts that were still intact, which surprised me. 6 rocking chairs were spaced along the porch in a row, all of them facing out toward the lane. All of them identical. That detail right there. I want to pause on it because I moved past it too quickly in the moment. 6 identical rocking chairs, spaced evenly, all facing the same direction. Someone had bought 6 of the same chair, or someone had acquired them one by one over time, always choosing the same model, so that the collection grew without growing different. Either way, the intent behind it was striking. It said, "We will always have enough seats." It said, "Whoever comes to this porch, there will be a place for them." 6 chairs is a large statement about hospitality. I teach 7th grade. I spend all day thinking about what choices mean and what messages they send. And those chairs sent a very specific message. Come, sit, stay. Darnell said, "Somebody liked to rock." I laughed. It did seem like a lot of chairs. He'd gotten a key from the county administrator's office. The lock stuck and required some persuasion, but the door opened and we went in. The interior was exactly as advertised, intact in a way that was almost disorienting. The furniture was still there, not sold off, not stolen, not broken up for firewood. The kitchen table still had a cloth on it, faded to near white, but there. The chairs, kitchen chairs, not the porch rockers, were still arranged around the table. In the living room, a sofa and 2 armchairs faced a fireplace with an ornate iron surround. A floor lamp stood in the corner. A Bible sat on the side table next to the armchair, a ribbon bookmark still in it. The bookshelves were full. I looked at the spines, old novels, almanacs, farm records going back to the 1950s. There was a coffee mug on the kitchen counter. I noticed it after I'd been in the house for about 10 minutes. We'd walked through the main rooms and come back to the kitchen, and I was standing near the sink, and I looked at the counter, and there it was. A plain white mug, handle facing right. It was clean. Not dusty the way everything else in the house was dusty. I mean, genuinely clean, like it had been recently washed, or like something had kept it clean. I almost touched it, and my hand actually went out toward it, and then I pulled back, which is not a thing I do. I'm not a recoiler. I'm a person who picks things up and examines them and decides about them analytically. Whatever made me stop my hand, it wasn't a conscious decision. I kept wanting to sit down. That's the odd thing about a house that intact. It still functions as a social invitation. The chairs say sit. The lamp says read. The sofa says rest. I kept having to remind myself that the last people to sit in these rooms had been dead for over a decade. Darnell was pragmatic about the whole thing. He had a notebook and he was moving through the rooms making lists of what was worth taking. I was slower, more interested in the details. I went upstairs while he was cataloging the kitchen. The upstairs had 3 rooms off a central hall. The first 2 were bedrooms, both intact. Beds made, dressers with their mirrors, closets with clothes still hanging. The 3rd room was at the end of the hall and its door was closed. I put my hand on the knob, turned it. It was locked. I went back downstairs and told Darnell, half because I was curious and half because any locked room in a supposedly empty house deserves attention from someone more practically minded than me. He came up, tried the knob, then dug a flathead screwdriver out of his jacket pocket and popped the lock in about 30 seconds, the way people who deal with old houses learn to do. The room was empty, almost completely. The floor was bare wood, swept clean, no dust in the way the other rooms had accumulated dust. The walls were bare. No furniture, no fixtures. One window facing the back hillside. The shade pulled all the way down so the room was dim, but someone had written on the wall, floor to ceiling on all four sides in a careful, even script, in pencil so light it was almost invisible until your eyes adjusted. The same text repeated. I stepped closer to read it, the way you step closer to read anything when you're an English teacher and text is in front of you. The sentences ran horizontally in lines about 2 inches apart, from the baseboard to as high as whoever wrote them could reach. The first line said, "They left the chairs out because they expected to come back." The second line, "They did not come back." The third line, but something else came instead and sat in the chairs. Then the 3 lines repeated. Over and over around all 4 walls, the same 3 sentences, hundreds of times in the same handwriting, at the same height, floor to ceiling, all the way around. I made a sound, I'm not sure what kind of sound. Darnell turned and looked at me, and then looked at the walls, and he did the thing I did, which was step closer and read and then go very still. We stood in that room for maybe 2 minutes, not touching anything, reading. The light was bad and the writing was faint, but there was enough of it at enough repetitions that we could see the pattern from anywhere in the room. Darnell said very quietly, "Who locked this room from the inside?" I hadn't thought about that. The lock had been a standard interior door lock, the kind you turn from the inside and it latches, the kind that requires a key or a tool to open from the outside. The room had been locked from inside, and the room was empty. We left the house. Darnell didn't even close his notebook. He just held it in his hand, and we walked out and got in the truck, and he drove us back to the county road without saying anything. After a while, he said he was going to pass on the salvage job. I said that seemed right. I've thought about those porch chairs. 6 identical rockers, all facing out. A lot of chairs for one household. And I've thought about what that text said. They expected to come back, but something else came instead and sat in the chairs, written on the walls of a locked room. Written by someone who had been inside a room they'd then locked from within. I've thought about the house's intact, inhabited quality, the way it felt social and welcoming, the way I kept wanting to sit down. I've thought about 12 years of emptiness and what might have moved into all that comfortable, expectant space. I dream about it sometimes, and in the dream I'm back on the porch at dusk, and all 6 rocking chairs are occupied. I can't see the faces of the things in them. I just know that when I step onto the porch, one of the chairs, the chair nearest the door, is suddenly empty, as if whatever was in it has just stood up. I look at the door. It's slightly open. The invitation is very clear. In the dream, I always go inside. I haven't figured out yet what that means about me. What I know is this. Old houses hold the shapes of the lives that filled them. The chairs say sit. The beds say sleep. The tables say stay. And sometimes, in certain houses, in certain hollows, in certain old places that have been empty long enough, the invitation is not from the people who left. It's from whatever moved in after. Be careful which invitations you accept. Closing note, 5 people, 5 different corners of the same ancient range of mountains. An electrician who opened a door he was never supposed to find. A journalist who looked at a photograph that looked back. A surveyor who lost 4 hours of his life inside a building no one should have entered. A truck driver who sat on a porch with company he couldn't see. A school teacher who read words on a wall that should not have been there. What do you do with stories like these? Some of you are going to look for explanations, and that's good. Explanations are useful. Some of the details probably do have explanations, but the details that don't, that's what I keep coming back to. The sealed room locked from the inside. The 4 hours of missing time. The photograph taken 43 years ago of a figure standing in a doorway that was empty when Bill looked through his viewfinder. These are the residue after the explanations run out. Here's something I've noticed, reaching out to people over the years and collecting accounts from the hills and hollows. The people who have these experiences are almost never the people you'd expect. They're not thrill seekers. They're not people who went in looking for something strange. They're working people. Competent, practical, grounded people who went into an old building for entirely ordinary reasons to do their job, to take some photographs, to help a friend, to stretch their legs on a long night. They weren't looking for anything beyond what they'd come for. What happened to them happened on the way to something else. That's the part that follows me. The ordinariness of the approach. Derek was just listing electrical circuits. Lenora was just writing a feature story about preservation. Walt was just running a survey traverse. Reuben was just killing 11 hours in a parking lot. Priscilla was just helping her cousin catalog some old furniture. None of them were testing anything. None of them were asking for anything. They knocked on a door they had every ordinary reason to knock on. And the door answered in a language none of them were prepared to understand. The mountains are old. They predate every name we've given them, every road we've cut through them, every house we've built and abandoned in their hollows. My grandfather used to say the mountains remember. I've come to believe he meant it as a warning. Stay careful, stay curious, and for the love of everything, think twice before you open a door you didn't know was there. If these stories reached you, please subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me which story stayed with you the longest. I want to know. And if you have your own account from the hills, the hollows, the old houses, and the back roads, send it my way. These mountains have more to say. We're just listening.